Somewhere in the deep past, there was a single moment, not a single day, but close to it, when your ancestors stopped being just another animal on the savannah and started becoming something the planet had never seen before. No thunderclap marked it, no sudden burst of light, and yet everything after that point moved differently. So what actually happened, and why did it happen to us, and not to any of the thousands of other species living alongside our ancestors at the time? The honest answer isn't a single event at all. It's a cascade, a series of small biological accidents that stacked on top of each other until, almost imperceptibly, one species crossed a threshold no other species has crossed since. Let's reframe what's actually happening. For most of the story of life on Earth, intelligence was simply one adaptation among thousands, no more special than a longer beak or a thicker coat of fur. Plenty of animals could solve problems, remember locations, even use simple tools. None of that alone explains what happened to us. The real turning point wasn't a single new ability. It was a specific combination of traits that, together, created something entirely new. The ability to accumulate knowledge faster than any single mind could invent it alone. Anthropologist Michael Tomasolo, who spent decades studying the differences between human and animal cognition, has argued that the true divide isn't raw intelligence at all. It's something he calls cumulative culture, the ability to build on the discoveries of others rather than starting from scratch every generation. A chimpanzee can learn to crack a nut with a stone, but a chimpanzee troop rarely improves on that technique across generations. Humans do, constantly, almost compulsively. One person's small improvement becomes the next person's starting point, and over enough generations, that compounding effect becomes unstoppable. Here's where it gets stranger. This ability didn't appear because our ancestors got smarter in the way we usually imagine smart. Tomasolo's research points to something more specific, an unusually intense drive toward shared attention, the instinct to look at what someone else is looking at, to point at something and expect another person to understand what you mean by it. Chimpanzees rarely do this. Human infants do it almost from birth. That single difference, the drive to share what's in your mind with someone else's mind, may be the seed from which everything else grew. Think about what that actually enables. Once you can reliably point at something and know another person understands your intention, you can teach. Not just show, but actually teach, correcting someone's technique, demonstrating a better way, building shared understanding across an entire group. Evolutionary anthropologist Joseph Henrich, who has extensively researched the origins of human culture, argues that this capacity for cultural learning became so powerful that it effectively took over as the primary driver of human evolution. Our brains didn't just get bigger because raw intelligence was useful. They got bigger and reorganized specifically to support absorbing an enormous, ever-expanding pool of collective knowledge. Now here's the twist. Once cumulative culture existed, something remarkable happened. Your ancestors stopped needing to individually rediscover survival skills their whole species had already learned. A single genius inventing fire-starting techniques could teach it to their band. That band could teach neighboring bands. Within a handful of generations, an insight that might have taken one brilliant individual a lifetime to stumble upon became common knowledge, passed down effortlessly to children who had never faced the original problem at all. No other species on Earth had ever built a system where knowledge could outlive the individual who discovered it, spreading sideways through a population and downward through time, essentially indefinitely. This changes the entire logic of evolution itself. For every other species, adaptation happens almost exclusively through genetic change, a process that takes many, many generations. But once your ancestors had cumulative culture, they gained a second channel of adaptation that operated far faster than genes ever could. A new tool, a new hunting strategy, a new way to prepare food, these could spread across an entire population within a single lifetime. Biologist and geneticist Kevin Lalland has described this as a kind of parallel evolutionary track, running alongside the slower genetic one, allowing humans to adapt to new environments at a speed biology alone could never achieve. Consider what this meant practically. Other large mammals, when faced with a new climate or a new landscape, had to wait for genetic adaptation, a process spanning tens of thousands of years, or simply fail to survive there at all. Your ancestors, armed with cultural transmission, could migrate into an Arctic tundra, and within a few generations, develop clothing, shelter techniques, and hunting strategies suited to conditions their bodies were never biologically built for. This is a big part of why humans eventually spread into nearly every terrestrial environment on the planet. While most other species remained confined to the narrow ecological niches their bodies happened to fit. There's another piece to this puzzle that's easy to overlook: language itself. Once your ancestors could communicate with enough precision to describe not just what was happening right now, but what had happened yesterday, what might happen tomorrow, and what someone else should do about it, teaching became exponentially more powerful. You no longer needed to physically demonstrate every single skill. You could describe it, warn about it, plan around it. Linguist and cognitive scientist Steven Pinker has argued that language essentially became a tool for downloading someone else's accumulated experience directly into your own mind, without you ever having to live through the original event yourself. Consider, too, how this changed the very shape of a human childhood. In almost every other species, an infant's survival depends almost entirely on instincts already wired in at birth. Human children are strikingly different. They arrive remarkably helpless, unable to walk, unable to feed themselves, unable to do almost anything a newborn gazelle can manage within minutes. For a long time, this looked like a biological weakness, but researchers studying human development have increasingly framed it as the flip side of the same cultural adaptation. A long, slow childhood isn't a design flaw. It's the runway a young brain needs to absorb an enormous library of inherited knowledge before ever being expected to survive alone. Other animals are born ready for the world their genes expect. Human children are born, in a sense, unfinished, waiting for their community to finish building them. This also explains something curious about human curiosity itself. Watch any toddler for even a few minutes, and you'll notice they don't just explore the world. They relentlessly watch other people, imitate their exact gestures, and ask why with an intensity that can wear down even the most patient adult. Developmental psychologists have documented this drive as something close to a biological compulsion rather than simple habit. A child doesn't imitate an adult's action only when it's clearly useful. They imitate faithfully, copying small, seemingly pointless details of a demonstrated task exactly as shown, a pattern researchers call over-imitation. That might look inefficient, but it's precisely the kind of faithful copying a cumulative culture needs in order to preserve small refinements that might not make obvious sense to a child, yet may carry hidden value discovered by someone else entirely. This is also why the timeline of human technological development looks the way it does, deceptively flat for an almost unimaginably long stretch, and then abruptly, dramatically steep. For hundreds of thousands of years, stone tool technology barely changed at all, generation after generation using nearly identical designs. Then, relatively recently in evolutionary terms, the pace of innovation began accelerating, and it has kept accelerating ever since. That shape isn't a coincidence. It's exactly what you'd expect from a system where knowledge compounds. A slow start, an almost invisible curve, and then a moment where accumulated knowledge crosses a threshold and growth becomes explosive. It's worth pausing on how strange this actually is, biologically speaking. Every other successful species on this planet is, in some sense, frozen at whatever adaptation got it this far. A shark today behaves remarkably similarly to a shark from millions of years ago because its adaptations are baked into its genes, and genes change slowly. Your ancestors broke that pattern entirely. Somewhere in that long, slow accumulation of shared attention, teaching, and language, a single lineage of primates built the first system in the history of life on Earth capable of learning faster than it could forget. This is precisely why the loss of a single knowledgeable person could once devastate an entire community in ways that seem almost unthinkable today. Before writing existed to preserve information outside a living mind, a skilled toolmaker, an experienced healer, or an elder who remembered where water could be found in a drought represented years of irreplaceable accumulated knowledge. Their death didn't just end one life. It could erase techniques and survival knowledge the group had spent generations building. This fragility is the other side of cumulative culture's power. A system that can grow explosively fast can also lose ground just as fast, if the chain of transmission between one generation and the next is ever broken. So what do you do with the knowledge that the moment you stopped being just another animal wasn't a leap, but a slow-building avalanche of small social habits, pointing, watching, teaching, describing? You start to see your own daily life differently. Every time you read an instruction someone else wrote, every time you learn from a mistake you never personally made, every time you build on an idea that took someone else a lifetime to develop, you're participating in the exact same process that separated your ancestors from every other species roughly involved in the great story of survival. It didn't take a bigger brain alone. It took a brain willing to plug itself into everyone else's. There is something quietly remarkable in that. You are, at this very moment, the beneficiary of an unbroken chain of shared attention, stretching back further than written history itself, further than agriculture, further than fire. Every skill you've never had to invent from scratch is a small inheritance from that first moment your ancestors began looking where someone else was looking, and understanding, for the first time, that another mind's thoughts could become part of your own. Next time you learn something new by simply watching someone else do it, remember what's really happening. It isn't just a modern convenience. It's the same ancient thread, still unspooling, that once turned an ordinary animal on the African savanna into the only species that has ever learned how to think together across generations it will never personally meet.